W is out. The new year is in. Luke Jones joins us live via satellite to discuss all things. This wasn't a good look to end the season, Luke. I got to be honest. I didn't go to the game. I sort of feel guilty when I skip Ravens games over 21 years. Don't ask me. It's just the way my mind works. And I felt a little guilty being on the couch and missing Steve Smith's last game and Marvin and all of this other. And then, the typical preseason game we all feared broke out, right?
Yeah, well, as I wrote at WNST.net, the Ravens played exactly like a team whose season had come to an end a week earlier. That's just the way it is. It was ugly. It wasn't a good look. There's no doubt about that. I'm not going to sugarcoat it or say that it's not a black eye for the coaching staff and the players because, that was a terrible performance. And it's one of the few performances in the John Harbaugh era where I'll question the effort. I'll question the focus.
In Ravens history, quite frankly, right?
Yeah.
Of all the games we've seen here for 21 years, boy, PU, that one stunk.
Yeah, but at the same time, this was a meaningless game, and this was a team that took probably, at least in terms of regular season, its biggest gut punch that it had ever taken, and certainly in the John Harbaugh era in the regular season. So
they haven't played like one of these, that dangling, one hanging game. We haven't had a lot of that around here, man.
Yeah, and to John Harbaugh's credit, and we talked about this a lot last year, I think that's why a lot of people expected them to come out and play hard on Sunday. We talked about how they played so hard to the very end of a 5-11 campaign. But again, that team never had a specific gut punch like we saw last Sunday in Pittsburgh. And look, that's not to excuse it, but I think it does put it into a little bit of a different context. And look, it was a meaningless game. I don't think we learned anything about this team on Sunday that we didn't already know. The offense has stunk most of the season. The defense stunk for the final quarter of the season, and we saw another bad performance against the Bengals team. No A.J. Green, no Gio Bernard, no Jeremy Hill, no Tyler Eifert. So I think that's probably more alarming just because the defense had played so well through the first 12 games of the season. But there wasn't anything I take away from Sunday's performance that I didn't feel I didn't already know. I think you can say what you want about the coaching staff. You probably had your mind already made up. If you're someone who wants John Harbaugh gone, you probably felt that way before Sunday's game. And same thing with Marty Morningwig, same thing with Dean Pease. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm just saying if you felt a certain way about it, I'm not sure what.
Yeah, this confirmed whatever your belief was.
Yeah.
The only thing I didn't like C.J. Mosley leaving on a cart. And look, we could go back and nitpick this thing about drives or lack of drives and missed tackle. It's just all the way through Steve Smith, the emotions of all that. A lot of guys playing what could be their last game, either in the league or in a Ravens uniform, one way or another. Going through veteran guys, going through young guys the Matt Elams of the world who didn't sort of kind of work out. There's all of that going on, but, at the end of the day, that's a piece of film that not a lot of guys are going to be proud of going into the offseason. It's not going to be the best piece of film for virtually anyone on the roster, but I hate the injury, dude. That's the thing that kind of drove me nuts, was seeing C.J. Mosley go off with 4 minutes left in the game.
Yeah, and I hear you on that. The reality is now you can make the argument, certainly, to sit Joe Flacco, to sit Marshall Yanda, who we know was playing with a bum shoulder, to sit Terrell Suggs, who we know played with a torn biceps for half the year. But you have a 53-man roster and you have 46 active on game day. You cannot physically rest all of your starting players.
No doubt.
So I hear you, and you hope for the best of the calf issue. He will have an MRI on Monday, and you hope that it's calf and not Achilles. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
No doubt.
But you're going to have some injuries, and if it had been Joe Flacco suffering a serious injury, then I think it's a much different discussion. But it definitely was unfortunate to see that, and I think what was unfortunate in my mind, and this is where I will take them to task a little bit more, is these guys had coaches and players almost sounded offended when they were kind of presented that this game was meaningless. Well, as I put it, their performance was offensive especially in that first half. But I think that's where it's a little, when they talked about how much they wanted to win, how they wanted to finish 9-7, and then to come out the way they did. Again, lots of teams have done that kind of stuff. I think because there is such a body of work for players playing hard for Harbaugh, even this year, even times where they didn't play well earlier in the season, I don't think it was a lack of effort. So I'll still lean more towards the track record there and say this more aberration than new trend. But it is something that I think you do keep in the back of your mind, and probably John Harbaugh will keep in the back of his mind in going into what I think we all figure is going to be a big season for him. I don't know if he survives another year of not making the playoffs. I think we're fairly getting to that territory at this point. It's the kind of territory that Brian Billick couldn't survive, quite frankly. So I think as much as you do look at that, that's where maybe if you're Harbaugh, maybe Sunday's performance bothers him a little bit more in that regard, that these guys just didn't really come out and look like a football team that was playing very hard. They didn't play well.
It's like, did we go to work at all this week, right?
Yeah,
I mean, to some degree.
So that's where I think if you're John Harbaugh and anyone who has a vested interest in this football team moving forward, that's one that maybe if things do continue to go south next year, maybe we will look back at this Week 17 performance and say, hey, that was a big red flag, that not just the performance, not just the ability not being there, but maybe the effort's starting to go sour as well. But, again, I also am realistic enough to know that, and Harbaugh acknowledges after the game, there is going to be some human nature to let down when you have that much of a heartbreaking loss that they suffered in Pittsburgh. Again, not an excuse, but I think it allows you to understand it and put it into a little more of a context that doesn't make it acceptable or okay, but you kind of just say, well, they really didn't have anything to play for, and you know what? It looked like it based on the way they played.
Well, we're going to talk about Marty Mornhinweg. We're going to talk about the offense, and yet again, the last game of the year, they ran the ball 16 times. They threw it 51 times. So, 16, 51. It has never even been portrayed as balance. And, look, for the Flacco detractors, and certainly that was one of the uglier passes he's thrown. And he has been known over 9 years to throw some ugly passes here and again. And he's also been known to win a lot of football games. I look at this run-pass ratio and passing and run obvious situations and, whether they're going to have a running game. And now Kubiak doesn't just exit Baltimore, he exits football on Sunday, right? So we're going to look back on that Kubiak offense and that made Flacco look so good and run the ball so well. I don't know that they really want to run the football, and I know that when this is all done, and I know that when Flacco, got past that 4,000-yard, that mythical number and all that, well, in order to get to that number, you had to throw the ball 50 times and run it 20 every week for 16 weeks. The one thing I'll say about the offense over 16 games, dude, I mean, that's 16 hours of football. I mean, they literally played one good football game this year against Miami out of 16. That was the only sort of A game you would give them through the course of the year. Everything else was a B or less. This was a disappointing year on the back end of a disappointing year, and to your point, they're starting to stack up a little bit, and we're starting to try to say, is there any identity to what they're trying to do here in the post-Ray Lewis era? And I know you and I talked about this 4 years ago when they're winning Super Bowls. There was going to be a hangover. Well, here comes the headache, Luke, right?
Well, I mean, this offense needs to be blown up. And I don't mean getting rid of everybody, but I think, and I didn't need to see Sunday's performance to know that Marty Mornhinweg is not the guy to lead this offense. And look, was he put in a bad spot? Sure. Are there other things working against this offense, including probably needing some more talent, just plain and simple, especially now that Steve Smith reconfirmed that he is in fact retiring? Yeah, I've talked a lot about needing more playmakers, but he did nothing, save for the Miami game. And, they had a couple other B performances this year, and everything else, in my mind, was C and worse. It was very, very little that looked above average. It was average and a lot of below average.
I mean a complete game, not just offense or defense or special teams. I mean, special teams, 6 or 7 of these games, special teams stuck out to do something, whether it's Tucker hitting 350-yard field goals, but a lot of that was based on the fact that the offense stalled at the 35-yard line, right?
Yeah, I mean, and as far as the pass run ratio on Sunday, I mean, this team was behind 20-3 at halftime, so that was some of that was to be expected, but at the same time, Joe Flacco, for the 11th time this season, threw more than 40 passes. Of those 11 games, he only had a 300-yard performance in 4 of those. And I'm not saying that as a sole knock on him. That's just a collective across the board inefficient passing game.
It became a check-down offense, right?
I mean, this has been such a high-volume, low-productivity passing game. I mean, it's really been incredible. It reminds me of the basketball player who scores 20 points, but he chucks up 35 shots to do it. That's not good. I mean, it's all about accumulating a ton of opportunities. I mean, you just said it. I mean, Flacco threw for over 4,000 yards, but he shattered his career high for passing attempts. He was just a hair better than his career worst yards per attempt that he set in 2013. And I mean, it's clear that this offense across the board was just broken. And I don't know if there's a whole lot you can point to about this offense that was good this year. I think Kenneth Dixon coming on late in the season, that was good to see that. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing more of him in 2017. There were a couple other individuals here and there. I give Marshall Yanda a hell of a lot of credit for the way that he played with basically one shoulder for the second half of the season and switching positions and still making the Pro Bowl. But what do you really say was good beyond that?
A couple of rookies stuck out, which was nice to see, right? Yeah, drafted guys that got on the field and played and looked like they're going to be able to play again next year, right?
Yeah, and I mentioned Dixon. I will say Ronnie Stanley played really well down the stretch. That was good to see. There's no doubt about that. So I want to give that its just due. But there wasn't a whole lot to like about this offense. There just wasn't. You said it. They either couldn't run the ball or in most cases didn't want to. Didn't really have a strong interest there, and that goes into the whole, what's the identity of your offense? John Harbaugh has talked a whole lot over the last few years about being a physical team that runs the football and valuing being able to do that. I haven't seen them value that. They haven't tried to do that. That doesn't tell me that at all. I think the first question that he needs to be asked, if we're working under the assumption that there's going to be someone else calling plays in 2017 other than Marty Morningwig, is, John, what do you want the identity of your offense to be? You've talked a lot about running the football, yet the last few years you haven't done that. Or the last 2 years anyway. So it's going to, that needs to be the biggest key. As much as we can talk about the defense, and we'll talk about the issues that have plagued this defense down the stretch, and the special teams having some mistakes at critical times. Certainly those two phases of the game have their own questions to address. The return game when it comes to special teams, but this offense, far and away, was their biggest issue this year. I mean, the reason why they were in such a position where they had such a small margin for error over the final 3 or 4 weeks was because, the defense had to carry the offense for most of the season. Were they tired because of that? I don't know, but the biggest objective, if you're looking at it just from a universal standpoint, is you have got to do whatever it takes to get Joe Flacco and this offense functioning at a higher level. And some of that's going to be coaching. Some of that's going to be adding some more talent, and they're certainly going to have to address the wide receiver position.
And some of that's going to be Joe Flacco, by the way, who did not have a good year.
Yeah, he didn't have a good year, and that's the thing. Believe me, this isn't me trying to knock him, but because many of these issues were out of his hands. But at the same time, I can't sit here and lie to you and say that I thought he played well this year. I think he had a pretty poor year. This is one of his 2 or 3 worst seasons, I think.
We didn't accomplish what we want, what he wants to accomplish, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And we'll talk to him in the offseason. I'm sure, we'll get together over beer and sit down for an hour and discuss it all. But, this will be one of those years where he looks back and says, that wasn't our best look all the way around. It was always one play short, 1 yard short, one protection short. It didn't happen for the team this year, quite frankly.
and I made this point. I've made this point several times over the course of our discussions and watching this team in 2016. This offense just consistently made it look so difficult to move the football. They made it look like it was rocket science to put together a touchdown drive. Very, very little came easy for them. And the other point that, and I felt this way again watching the Bengals just frustrate them. It felt like this offense was playing like it was 11 on 15 all year. That's what it felt like. The defense had extra defenders on the field. That's how difficult.
Like a power play.
Yeah, they made it look so difficult this year, and it shouldn't be that way. You see some of these offenses around the league, and look, I'm not saying the Ravens have to be the number one scoring offense in football to be a winning team to get back to the playoffs. They don't have to do that, but you got to be better than what they've been the last couple of years. It's looked way too difficult, and you can't have a quarterback that is being paid as much as Flacco is and have such poor productivity as an offense. That just tells you that the whole thing was just broken this year. You don't want any quarterback throwing the ball 50 times consistently. Flacco averaged, I think it was 42 throws per game this year. That's way too high. Under Gary Kubiak 2 years ago, when he had arguably his best regular season of his career, he threw about 34 times a game. Much more reliance on the running game, and when he was throwing the ball, he was pushing it down the field more.
Forsett had him in 2nd and 3 a lot, right? That year was special, and the way he ran the ball was special.
It was, but Flacco played much better too. They pushed the ball down the field more. Last year we thought it was because they didn't have vertical threats, and I think that was part of it. But this year they had Mike Wallace and Brashad Perriman who could stretch the field. They didn't use them. They didn't use them effectively. Now Wallace got over 1,000 yards, but a lot of that was his yards after the catch on a lot of slants and underneath throws. They very rarely took shots down the field, and they didn't hit on enough of those. So it's just like I said, and I realized Marty Morningwig was put in a tough spot taking over in Week 6. That's just not ideal. For every Jim Caldwell situation where it works out beautifully, and the Ravens with the ultimate example of going on to win a Super Bowl when they fired Cam Cameron 4 years ago, there are many more situations like what you saw with Morningwig where wasn't any market improvement, still had the same issues, still the entire offense just broken. This thing needs to be completely scratched and rebuilt as far as bringing in another offensive coordinator. I'm not sure what that system is. I don't know if it's the West Coast. I'm starting to wonder more and more, Nessa, as I've thought about this, and I've talked about this with a few people here and there. I'm starting to wonder if what Cam Cameron was doing with Eric Coryell way back when was what was best for Joe Flacco. It's just he needed a new voice. Cam's message had gotten stale after 5 years. I'm wondering if that is actually what's better suited for Joe Flacco. And look at his yards per attempt then in those first 4 or 5 seasons of his career compared to what he's been the last couple of years. And I think that's a fair question to ask. I think that's
they need to get him hit less. They need to have him look more like Brady and Manning, checking down at the line of scrimmage, moving into a better play, getting 5 yards on quick passes. And, I don't see that in this offense. I haven't seen that. And I don't know that Joe prefers that, quite frankly. And whether Joe wants to be under center or whether he wants to be in the gun, they obviously work. Joe works really well in this sugar huddle, tempo, go kind of offense. That's not a bad thing if you can master it. But in order to master it, Brashad Perriman needs to know where the hell to line up. He needs to catch the ball when it's thrown to him. You need to have veteran guys around you who know what to do. You need to have running backs that know how to pick up protections very, very quickly. This was not that group of human beings for the most part, right?
Yeah, and again, where does the line separate between coaching and needing some more talent? And I don't think this offense was completely devoid of talent. This offense should have been no worse than an average offense.
But the first 8 weeks, the O-line was a mess. I think that's That's really where it gets sideways. When that's not going right, nothing's going right.
I hear you, and I don't disagree, but their problems ran beyond that, because even when they had more stability with the offensive line in the second half of the year, they had a couple better performances, but they still had a lot of what we saw on Sunday. I mean, it's just they need better coaching, and they need some more good football players. They need to find a game changer. They whether it's and I'm not saying that go draft another running back, but whether it's a running back, whether it's a receiver, whether it's an all-pro kind of tight end, they need something they need something special on the offensive side of the football. Steve Smith has had a special career, but Steve Smith wasn't necessarily special this year. He had a couple special moments here and there, certainly. Mike Wallace had a nice season. Certainly like him as a number 2 receiver, but he's not a number 1 guy. Dennis Pitta had a nice season, but you look at some of his production. I mean, a third of Joe Flacco's throws on Sunday were to Dennis Pitta. That's not good. That's not what you want. And the fact that they scored 10 points was kind of evident from that. So they've got some decent pieces, but they're still lacking those high-end, top-of-the-roster guys on either side of the football. And at some point, the Ravens need to find their Antonio Brown. I mean, it just and I'm not saying that it's easy to do that, but until you do, I think it's asking a lot for this team to be that dramatically much better than what they've been the last couple of years. You talk all you want about coaching, you got to have the horses, and I think with this offense, they didn't have either in 2016, and big reason why they finished 8-8 and missed the playoffs.
He is Luke Jones. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Baltimore Luke. You can also find him, Luke, at WNST.net. We've talked a lot about the offense. We'll come back, talk about the defense and more. Happy New Year. It is not a happy beginning in 2017, but certainly onward and upward for the Ravens as we now sit back and watch the Miamis and the Pittsburghs and the Oaklands and the Houstons play next weekend, and then on to the Super Bowl. We'll be in Houston for Super Bowl 51 with full coverage 4 weeks from now. So in the meantime, we're going to sit around here and talk to a bunch of people about how to make the football team better. You can find me, Nasty, at WNST.net, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. And anything you miss, you can find in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. Just download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Morning newspaper ships to your email inbox each and every morning. It's powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month, even in 2017, to get in the best shape of your life. If you saw any of the Times Square stuff, plenty of Planet Fitness going on up there in New York, in and around Mariah Carey as well. Last but not least, any breaking news, any weirdness to start 2017, big news, coaching changes, those kinds of things. You'll get it first on the WNST Tech Service. That is brought to you by Coons Ford, Security Boulevard in Dennis. He'll be here on Thursday, getting you ready for the weekend. I'm going to be watching the Caps this week, and obviously the Terps, who completely wet the bed in the middle of the Ravens game. Maybe some of you didn't catch that Nebraska loss, but I did. It was quite the busy day heading into Sunday night with the Caps game, and then all the playoff action in the late afternoon. It was a wild day one to start our sports calendar, and kind of weird with the Monday off as well. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.